Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the meeting of March 10th. I call the meeting to order at 5:30. Do I have a volunteer for leading us in the Pledge of Allegiance? Thank you, Mark.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Can we have roll call, please?
Councilmember Infante?
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Claudia Arona?
Here.
Councilmember Smith?
Here.
Councilmember Elizabeth Arona?
Here.
Mayor Brown?
Here.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right. We have no public communications. Anybody in the audience or on Zoom that needs to say? Okay, we're clear. With that being said, would you please read us the action for our closed meeting?
Recess to closed session, item number 2A, conference with labor negotiator. The closed session is authorized by Government Code Section 54957.6. Agency designated representative Dave Fleischman, Assistant City Attorney. Employee organization, Teamsters Union Local 986.
Thank you. We are now adjourned to our closed session. Oh, I'm sorry?
We're not adjourned to it, are we?
briefing?
Thank you, Mayor. The council met in closed session. All members of the council were present. We talked about the one item on the posted agenda, and the council took no reportable action.
Thank you. That being said, we'll recess to the regular session and begin at 6:30. Good evening. I'm going to call this regular meeting to order at 6:30. Roll call, please.
Councilmember Infante.
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Claudia Rona.
Here.
Councilmember Smith.
Here.
Councilmember Elizabeth Arona.
Here.
Mayor Brown.
Here.
Thank you.
Okay. Lori McConnell is going to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. Please rise.
Place your right hand over your heart, and gentlemen, please remove your caps. Ready, begin.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Lori. That moves us to the next opportunity. We're going to have proclamations. And I have one proclamation here for tonight to the City of Solvang Danish Sisterhood. And I'll read it as it goes. Whereas the Danish Sisterhood in America was founded in 1883 by Christine, and help me with the pronunciation, Hemmersing son, with an E, to unite Danish immigrant women, promote cultural preservation, and provide support to members and their communities, fostering a lasting legacy of sisterhood and service. And whereas since the founding, March 20, 1965, the Danish Sisterhood of America, Flora Danica Lodge number 177 in Solvang, has served as a beacon of cultural preservation and civic engagement, enriching the lives of its members and the broader community. And whereas on March 20, 2025, the Danish Sisterhood Flora Danica number 177 will celebrate its 60th anniversary, marking 6 decades of tradition, community service, and dedication to Danish heritage in the Santianes Valley. And whereas from its earliest days, Flora Danica Lodge number 177 has embraced its mission of service and cultural preservation, organizing fundraising events such as Danish Sisterhood and Brotherhood District Conventions, craft booths, and holiday celebrations to support local causes. And whereas this milestone anniversary will be commemorated with an anniversary event that unites longtime members and new faces in a celebration of shared history, laughter, and Danish traditions, reinforcing the bonds that have connected the lodge's members for generations. Now, therefore, be it resolved that I, Mayor David Brown, along with the City Council of the City of Solvang, California, do hereby proclaim to honor and recognize Flora Danica Lodge 177 for 60 years of dedicated service to Santianes Valley, its commitment to preserving the Danish heritage, and its contributions to the community, and we extend our best wishes for its continued success for years to come. Thank you so much. We have Lori McConnell. I'd like to present this to you. These are the sisterhood.
Yes, representative members. And we have Jan Ziegler, our current treasurer, Elsa Lassiter, who's been involved for many years at local and national level. And Glenda Madrid, who's she's our photographer right now. She's held many offices like Elsa, and Glenda is the current national secretary. And Mindy, she's just ordinary. Mindy just finished being vice president at the local lodge.
Oh, congratulations.
All right, thank you so much.
Congratulations.
Thank you, really appreciate it.
Another 60 years or more.
And you don't have to be Danish to join. And we do have some Mr. Sisters.
But I can see,
Any comments you want to make?
yeah, On behalf of Floridanica Lodge number 177 in Solvang, I can tell you it's our passion and our joy to share our Danish heritage with everybody who's interested. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Okay. Presentations. We have a California Counseling Grant presentation. Who's next? Would you like to?
Yeah, so when we renewed the contract a few meetings ago, it was requested by the council to have our grant writers present kind of what they've been doing, where we're going, and all that fun stuff. So Therese and the group from California Consulting are online, and Therese will give the presentation, and just tell me when I need to advance the slides, and take it away.
Sounds great. Thank you, Randy. Hi, everyone. Thank you, Mayor Brown and council members, for allowing us to present to you this evening. My name is Teresa Sarkeesian, and I'm a grant writer for California Consulting, assigned to the city of Solvang. So with me on the call, I have Steve Samuelian, the CEO of California Consulting, and I also have Sammy D'Ambrosio and Clayton Owens, who are our management assistants. Next slide, please. Oh yeah, so, okay, making sure I'm seeing the screen clearly. So as Solvang's primary grant writer, I identify and assess grant opportunities, ensure eligibility, and craft the applications. So this involves researching funding sources, making sure the city's priorities are aligned, determining if the project is feasible, letting the city know if there are any match requirements, letting them know of any compliance issues. And then I collaborate with the city officials and program managers, and we develop a proposal. And beyond submitting the proposal, I track the application status and refine our strategies based on the feedback that we get. So next slide, please. So at Cal Consulting, we facilitate monthly meetings with the city manager, with city staff, and 5 team members from our company. So we prepare and distribute an agenda every month. And on that agenda, we have past, present, and future grant opportunities. So what did we apply for? What is the status of that grant application? What is active / pending now? What are we working on currently? And then what opportunities have we found that we think would be a good fit for the city? So during this meeting, the city then tells us, well, this grant looks like it's a great opportunity for us. We have a project that fits. Or they say, oh, this other one is not really a great fit for us. And so if we're given the green light, then we schedule a scoping meeting and we dive into that particular grant specifically. Next slide, please. So these are the grants that have already been submitted for the city. You'll see 2 are local opportunities, Senator Butler's appropriations request and Congressman Carvajal's request. Those are both local opportunities. And then the remaining 3 are federal opportunities. So we can move on to the next slide. I'm going to go into detail as we move forward. So in progress, we have a local opportunity. This is through the California Department of Parks and Recreation, the LWCF grant opportunity. So the city currently is seeking to enhance rec opportunities at Hans Christian Andersen Park. They are looking to fund trail improvements, as well as fund new outdoor exercise equipment. This would be great for residents that don't have access to a gym. Maybe they cannot afford a gym. And also the trail currently is man-made and in need of widening and accessibility improvements. And so this grant is going to be great for getting that project off the ground as well. Next slide, please. So in addition to the monthly meetings that we have with Cal Consulting and the city, we also coordinate agency meetings. Each agency, of course, knows their grant opportunities inside and out, and so sometimes it's useful to connect the city to those agency contacts. And so Cal Consulting has coordinated and facilitated the following meetings with grant agencies. The EDA to discuss Solvang's wastewater treatment project, Senator Butler's office regarding other grant opportunities, and actually they did recommend that we move forward with that opportunity, which is why we have it on the grant submitted list. We have also met with Haggerty from the California Office of Emergency Services, and we have had follow-up meetings with them because there were projects that Solvang was interested in, and this funding is through FEMA. And so we have had multiple meetings with them discussing different projects. Next slide, please. Okay. So in addition to the meetings that I have already mentioned, we have also met with the USDA to discuss the wastewater treatment plant project. We've met with your US Bureau of Reclamation and Water Smart staff. And they have also given us the guidance to apply for their agency's Water Smart grants. And so we have that on our list as well, a few slides away. So once those Water Smart grants become available, we have been given the green light from the agency directly to move forward in applying for those as well. Next slide, please. Okay, so here are a few of the challenges that we have faced. First of all, federal funding priorities in the past favored disadvantaged communities. This clearly limits Solvang's ability to compete. Most grants would prioritize cities that can determine through various tools, like there's the CEJST tool, the Climate, Economic Justice, and Social Equity tool. There are various parameters that they use online to determine whether or not the city can compete, and usually it's based on their disadvantaged status. Now, the new priorities that have been sent to us from Washington indicate that a city no longer has to be disadvantaged to compete. So we're very optimistic that this is going to help Solvang compete on equal footing with other cities. In addition to funding priority issues, there have also been some staffing hurdles that have gotten in the way. So there has been an absence of a utilities director for some time. Now that's no longer an issue, so we're very excited about that. There also was a staffing gap with the public works director, which now also is not an issue. And so it's definitely reassuring and optimistic moving forward knowing this. Next slide, please. So here are some key takeaways from the grants that were not awarded. So Senator Butler's appropriations request, we had met with their office, as I mentioned earlier, and they gave us the green light to move forward. However, this is highly competitive. Earmarks typically are. Funds may have been insufficient to cover all of the requests that they have received. And in the past, often larger cities with a broader regional impact are typically prioritized. I also want to note that although the city requested our assistance, This was primarily with the language for the earmark/appropriations request. We at Cal Consulting are not a lobbying firm, and we do not engage in any lobbying activities. Our role was simply to monitor progress and assist with developing the language. Now, the next bullet point on this list, the SS4A, this is a federal opportunity that we sought. It is through the Department of Transportation and is primarily a safety planning grant. So despite the fact that the city wanted to pursue this grant, it is a good thing that Solvang does not have the data that indicates high collisions and high fatality numbers. That's a good thing. That's good news. However, not having that data does get in the way of us competing because we are not technically at risk, and therefore the chances of us getting funding for a safety planning grant is slimmer. On average, for federal grants, there is a 10% success rate. But like I said, we are hoping that now with the policy changes that have come from Washington, that Solvang will be able to compete a bit more. So next slide, please. Yeah, so this slide says the federal administration is considering policy changes to remove the grant preference. They have implemented the policy changes. So yeah, this is going to be more competition friendly for Solvang. And we are hoping that the shift will enhance Solvang's competitiveness for federal funding in the near future. Next slide, please. Here I have upcoming opportunities listed for Solvang. We don't have to go through each one in depth, but I just want everyone to get an idea of the grant landscape out there. So this is an infrastructure and public works grant. It's for active transportation. The city also does not have to be disadvantaged to qualify. They offer planning and construction options. And so if the city, for instance, is interested in new or improved sidewalks, bike lanes, trails that will enhance mobility, if they want ADA compliant infrastructure, this would be a great opportunity for that one. If the city has gone through their planning and they're ready for construction already, this is great for that too. We can move on to the next one. So the Fast Charge California project grant through the CEC, this is a EV charging infrastructure grant. Most cities are going to be pursuing these opportunities. And so it's great for Solvang to remain on top of it. And if there's a need for EV chargers, which there probably will be, if not now, definitely in the near future, this is a great opportunity for that one. Next slide, please. So we have the SMART grant program through the Department of Transportation. This one is great for innovative strategies with the city's transportation infrastructure. So roadway sensors that can help monitor traffic, using air quality and congestion sensors to inform sustainable transportation. Even if self-driving cars are of an interest to the city, then this can help test autonomous or electric last mile delivery solutions. Various options. There's also no match, and so another great opportunity to keep in mind. Next slide, please. So the Local Transportation Climate Adaptation Program, this is through the state, and so it is a little bit less competitive than the federal opportunities that we have just discussed. So this is great for climate resiliency, so strengthening roads, bridges, transit systems against climate impacts. And so wildfires is on that list and relevant to Solvang. So this could be another great opportunity for the city. Next slide, please. With my conversations with Jose and with Roger at the city, we had discussed in the past water sustainability being a priority. So the Bureau of Reclamation during our meetings identified this grant for us and said that when it becomes available, pursue it. So the program provides funding for large-scale water recycling projects, improving water sustainability. So this can be improving water treatment facilities. It can mean expansion of existing water recycling plants to increase capacity. It can be the use of recycled water in industrial processes. It's broad and it's a good one. Development of pipelines and pumping stations for delivering recycled water is another option. There is a 75% non-federal cost share, but you have a lot of options of project availability for this one. Next slide, please. This is another grant opportunity that the agency identified directly, the Planning and Project Design Grant. So this can help with preliminary engineering if needed, meaning design and feasibility studies for new or upgraded water management strategies, and also ecosystem restoration planning. So projects aimed at restoring either aquatic ecosystems, improving water quality, improving water storage, upgrading water infrastructure projects, etc. Next slide, please. So these are the priorities that the city has informed us of or informed us on. The city has let us know that they value infrastructure improvements, sustainability initiatives, and community development. And the grants indicated on the list are the ones that we have submitted in order to further those goals. We are always open to expanding the goals, and we enjoy hearing back from the city what their new projects are, what their new priorities are, and aligning ourselves as best as we can with that. Next slide, please. So that is the end of my presentation. Thank you all for your time, and please let me know if you have any questions, or our Cal Consulting staff too. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions from council?
I do have some questions. So my understanding is that Solvang often doesn't qualify for many of these grants because it's not considered a disadvantaged community. You say that you feel more optimistic about Solvang qualifying for grants because that criteria is no longer being considered at the federal level. However, we keep hearing that organizations like FEMA are not going to have the same access to funds. Do you still feel optimistic about these grants being available?
Yes, I do feel optimistic. I can defer to Steve for more insight from Washington. The aspects of the city that I have highlighted in the past when disadvantaged status was an issue were all of the hospitality workers and all of the folks that commute into Solvang that are typically entry-level employees. And we would highlight in the past that this is an area for funding, that like the city needs to be competitive for this. Now that the funding criteria has changed, funding will still come through the federal government. But I will defer to Steve for more insight on that.
Thank you, Therese, and good evening, Mayor, Council Members, City Manager Murphy. Thank you. I'm Steve Samuelian with California Consulting. Thank you, Therese. I think you gave a very articulate definition and discussion about the changes in DC. The long and short of it, and we've been monitoring it very, very closely. Obviously, it's our business. We're the largest grant writing firm in the state, so we're watching grants in DC very, very closely. I don't think anyone can say with 100% certainty what's going to transpire with the new administration, but we do have some clues. We have some precedent and some data. So far, it's been made clear publicly. It's not any inside information. It's been made publicly that there are some issues the administration does not want to fund. For example, they're not interested in funding DEI. They're not interested in funding climate change. Those are some things they've made very clear at the federal grant level. And we have some examples of that. We have an example of a USDA Community Wildfire Defense Grant, which was issued, and our grant writers were writing it. It had a due date at the end of February, and that grant was removed from the USDA website, and one day it was gone. And we all looked at each other and said, wow, where did that go? We're writing it. It's due in like 2 weeks. What happened? We didn't know if the funding was cut. We didn't know if the program was eliminated. About 8 days later, I think it was about 8 days later, the grant reappeared on the USDA website with a new deadline that was pushed back, and the disadvantaged, quote-unquote, community requirements were changed. So what we're told is that the administration is looking through grant requirements and not eliminating grants, but looking to see if the grants fund the things they don't want the grants to fund. And if they do, then those items are going to be removed or they're going to be minimized, and a new solicitation is going to be issued. And we've seen this now twice. There's another grant that one of our other senior grant writers told me about. The name is escaping me right now of the grant, but she said the same exact thing happened with that grant. They pulled it off. They went through almost like an audit or an inventory of the guidelines and removed the items that they didn't agree with, and then reissued the grant solicitation with the same funding and almost identical guidelines, not identical, but almost identical guidelines, and a new due date. So we have at least two precedent-setting actions now. We're not certain if that's going to be the new rule, for the next 4 years, but it certainly seems like it. The lobbyists I talked to in D.C. tell me that there's definitely a shift. I think we all know that on the priorities of what federal grants are going to look like. We don't have any indication that federal grants are going away anytime soon. I think you all saw in the news where the administration froze some federal grants because they wanted to look at the guidelines to see what they were funding. And that was very quickly, I think within 24 hours, was overturned. In fact, a restraining order was issued and the grants were reinstated. So that's the best information I can give you from what we're told from DC. I wish I could be more concrete or have more certainty, but we want to be accurate in what we tell our clients rather than say something and then a month or 2 months later, it turns out that it's inaccurate. So what we know so far, we're proceeding, we're writing as many grants as we've ever written, and we haven't, knock on wood, fingers crossed, we haven't seen any grants defunded or eliminated or funding cut or anything like that.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
I have a couple questions. Can you just explain how you assess a grant match? You have some percentages. What is just give us a little more context. What does match really mean? Is it alignment in what we're seeking and what the grant is being awarded for, or is it our likelihood and probability of an award?
Thank you. So the match requirement is typically required from the agency. It's listed in the guidelines of that particular application. So if, for example, we're seeking a grant through the Department of Transportation and their maximum available for that grant is, let's say, 1 million per award. They have it listed in their guidelines what their match requirement is. They can say, we will fund 75% of this project. And so we know black and white there. Okay, so that means that if we're awarded this, we have to be prepared to allocate 25% of the project cost. Sometimes
Okay, so
there's
a
no
match
match
is really a dollar match, then not a
Yes.
do we meet all the criteria match? I understand.
Correct.
How
correct.
do we assess when we choose a grant to pursue or when we're writing up our positioning? How do we assess the likelihood that or the probability that we're in a good position?
That's a good question. So the biggest indicators that stop us in our tracks in the past were when it would say disadvantaged cities are prioritized. So we would see, okay, if it's disadvantaged, then we know we should not pursue this opportunity. We should pursue other opportunities. Of course, if it is a grant that the city is really interested in, there are other angles that we would take in the past. Like I mentioned how we would indicate that a lot of the hospitality employees would come from disadvantaged communities. And so we would try to find an angle that way to even align ourselves with that requirement. But every application has a notice of funding opportunity, and basically it's a collection of guidelines and rules. And in that packet, it says we have this minimum requirement. We have these obstacles that you have to go through in order to be competitive. They have a scoring criteria, and it even says like this score gives you this line item will give you this many points. Your community engagement for this project will give you 10 points. So that's another indication that can tell us whether or not we'll be competitive or not.
So you know, the great news in this update, which is really useful information, is that you clearly are aligned with our city priorities in what we're trying to pursue and what we've applied to, and what you have, teed up for us to pursue. The most interesting are the ones that clearly catch our eye are the multi-million-dollar grant values at over 14 million each, which is clearly one of our largest priorities and largest projects, which is the wastewater treatment plant rebuild. And it's very interesting that in both cases we're pursuing California state leaders grants, I'll call it that, political leader grants. And so I'm wondering, how do we really need to back into an answer for how we get this funding. We've been doing a dance with USDA for a long time on that same pursuit. How do we assess where we really are in establishing a large amount of funding for this significant project that we need to probably get underway within the next 2 years?
Yeah, so there are two of the federal opportunities that I have included on our in our presentation, both through the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation, and it is reassuring that the agency themselves gave us the green light that we met with them, we told them about the wastewater treatment project upgrades, and they said this project would be great for these opportunities. And so that gave us a little bit more confidence as well that our project will be assessed positively. Of course, we hope. So the large-scale water recycling project grant is slated to come out this summer. And there's also the planning and project design grant that also is expected to come out this summer. Now, from a local perspective, so the request that we sent in for Congressman Carvajal's office, that was one of the $14 million requests. So we received news back from them that their deadline will be, or I guess the update they're going to give us will be after March 14th. And so on slide number 4, where it says that this is under Senate review, we're hoping that sometime within the next week or so, we'll hear good news from Congressman Carvajal's office. That's the update that they gave us, that they'll let us know by the 14th.
March. That's next week.
Yes.
Yeah.
Any other?
Thank you. No, thank you very much.
Okay. I just had a couple things. My definition of success, first of all, I think we put you on kind of a short leash with the contract renewal. But that was purposeful. We haven't seen, well, our definition of success on this side of the ticket is a funded program or an accepted grant request. We haven't seen that from your organization yet. How do you define success for what you're doing and why we should renew our contract?
Yeah, Terrence, I'm happy to answer that.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mayor and council members. Great question. We define success as return on investment, ROI. So for the last 21 years at California Consulting, we've worked for over 100 cities, probably close to 150 cities. And in almost every case, we've had a ROI, return on investment. Sometimes it's taken some time. It has not always occurred in the first 6 months or 9 months or even 12 months. Sometimes it takes longer, but our definition of success is definitely how much money did the city pay us and how much money did we bring in funded grant awards. That's how we define it. And that's how most of our clients define it. They hold us to that standard, and that's a very reasonable, very pragmatic standard to hold us to. So definitely hold us to that, and I'm confident that with Therese's work and Sammy and Clay's work, we're going to land grant awards in the future for Solvang. It has been, as Therese outlined in her PowerPoint, in her slide deck, there have been some challenges, some out of our control, like the disadvantaged community status and the city staffing, but those are in the rearview mirror now. We're not, we don't want to rehash those. We want to look forward. The LWCF grant Therese is writing for Parks and Rec is one that we feel optimistic about. It's a highly competitive grant, I will say that, but I will also say we've written that grant many times and had it funded for many cities, both disadvantaged and more affluent cities. And we work with several cities up in the Bay Area that are very affluent, and we've been able to land grant awards for them. Sausalito is one. There's Orinda. We just got 4 grant awards for Orinda, which is a very affluent city in Contra Costa County. So we've done well with non-disadvantaged cities. I think we're on the right track. Your city manager is great to work with. He is front and center on everything we ask him for. He's on every Zoom every month we have, and pursuing grants aggressively. We work with a lot of city managers, and your city manager is great to work with. He helps us do our job, which is our job is to get grants awarded for you. So short answer, I'm optimistic that we're going to land some grants. Therese, I don't know what your thoughts are. Sammy and Clay, you're working on this issue. We're all working on it together. Feel free to chime in.
Okay.
Yeah, I, of course, agree that success is defined by a return on investment. I also believe that our flexibility and our willingness to pivot and do whatever is needed to align ourselves with the city's goals. And so I have gotten to know the city and gotten to know that the water sustainability and infrastructure improvements are a priority. We are hearing new things coming for funding priorities and pivoting our strategies and our methods in order to get those grants funded. And so I think our flexibility is also another key thing here. Yeah.
And Therese, I'll mention one other thing. Obviously, the grant awards is first and foremost, and that's how we define success. But there have been other things that California Consulting has been able to do for the city, and the city manager will tell you that. When the city needed to reach the State Water Resources Control Board, I sent an email and we had an immediate conference call Zoom with the Division of Financial Assistance at the State Water Board in Sacramento with the folks that I work with there, got them all on a Zoom and walked through all the issues in Solvang. Same thing with Bureau of Reclamation. USDA was mentioned earlier. When USDA came up in one of our Zooms, I got Sally Tripp, the USDA Rural Development Director, who I've worked with for 21 years, immediately on email, connected her with the city manager. She called her staff there in your area, connected that person with the city. So there are other non-grant award things that California Consulting has been able to deliver for the city during the term of our contract, connecting you with federal and state agencies. Therese mentioned Cal OES, meeting with Cal OES, the contact we have at Cal OES, getting her on a Zoom, getting her on the phone, walking through the project with her. So those are not directly grant awards, but I think everyone would agree there's value to that.
Thank you. Any other questions? Oh, Mr. Murphy?
I just wanted to offer a couple things too. California Consulting costs the city between $55,000 and $60,000 a year is what the current contract is, $4,600 I think a month. We couldn't employ somebody for that. They get us the opportunity to play in grants that we may not be aware of or wouldn't have the time or the expertise. Grant writing is a skill, acquired skill. There is no way we would be able to do some of the things that they do for us. I would point out, they talk about the LWCF grant. We are pursuing a grant to improve our parks. They're working with us. Buellton is also one of their clients, and we're working collaboratively with them to pursue funding for the Solvang pool up at the high school. They're not breaking it out and charging us separately. They're working with us. So they go above and beyond, in my opinion. And I too am confident that we will land a grant soon. Some of it has been staffing. Some of it has been, it's just not the right fit. I mean, there's a lot of grants out there, but, you know, and sometimes we could get a grant, but then, I mean, one like the EV charging one they shared a moment ago, we don't have staff to vote to be able to manage a project like that. I don't think it's prudent to get a grant just because we can and then create more work for us. It needs to fit into our workflow, and it has to fit in with the goals of the council and the community. So there's a lot of that. They did turn that earmark request around for Carvajal's office to kind of follow up on that. The $14 million is out of was the original request. They got back to us a week or two ago and said $14 million is not possible, but it's still possible to get $1 million. So that's not a grant, that's an earmark. So there's no matching or anything. So there are things still in the works in that regard. And if it weren't for their help, we probably would not have been able to even get in line for that.
Okay. Now, I'm just not trying to just bust your chops, so to speak, but we're accountable, and we both need to be accountable, so I appreciate that. Thank you for your presentation, and we'll move on to the next item.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Council.
Thank you. Okay, now we have public communications. Would you like to read that, Ms. Clerk?
At this time, you may address the council on items not on the agenda and on consent. Time limit is 3 minutes. We will start with in-person public comments first.
I have a request here from Scott Love. If you'd like to come up, introduce yourself, give us your address or location and give us your insights.
Okay, good evening, Mr. Mayor and City Council members, staff. My name is Dr. Scott Love. I'm a 28-year resident of Solvang, and I have come here to speak about our immigrant community, our cherished immigrant community, and how we can protect them. The issue of immigration reform presents us with an urgent moral call to action. How we address this issue will define who we are as a nation. Our history of immigration reform is not something of which we can be proud. A brief review is instructive. In 1882, the Chinese Exclusion Act prohibited certain laborers from immigrating to the United States. In 1921, the Emergency Quota Act limited the number of immigrants allowed entry based on nationality. The Immigration Act of 1924 established national origins quotas that severely restricted immigration from Asia. And of course, the infamous Japanese Internment Act was an executive order. It was not a law, it was an executive order, 9066, which was signed by President Franklin Roosevelt in February of 1942, forcing Japanese Americans from the West Coast into internment camps. Comprehensive immigration reform has eluded Congress for decades. Presidents have increasingly turned to executive orders to reshape asylum and border policy. The judicial branch has weighed in as well. In the absence of significant reform, immigrant workers are often abused and exploited and have become scapegoats and victims of racism and stereotyping, beginning with the current occupant of the White House and leaving people in fear. Long-standing federal policy labeled schools, clinics, hospitals, courts, houses of worship, and rallies as, quote, sensitive locations, unquote, where ICE agents could not enter to make arrests for immigration violations. But one of Mr. Trump's executive orders now allows ICE to arrest undocumented immigrants. And I use undocumented immigrants. I wish we could ban the words illegal aliens from the English language, unless we're talking about creatures from Mars, I guess. But one of Mr. Trump's executive orders now allows ICE to arrest undocumented immigrants at these sites, thereby deterring families from sending their children to school or getting the help they need, and threatening the health and well-being of our entire community. I know of individuals here in our fair city who will no longer go to the food bank at Bethania, or they wait until dark. There are no longer any impregnable, may I go on? Is that
How much longer is this?
another minute or so?
1 minute, please.
Okay. There are no longer any impregnable legal guardrails left in the United States to prevent mass deportations. As Trump's ICE begins roundups and deportations, many good people and their families, our neighbors and friends, members of our community, are endangered and understandably frightened. Legislatures and city councils can erect firewalls between state and local resources and ICE. Schools can refrain from collecting data on their students that could be used to deport them and their families. And community organizations can conduct Know Your Rights workshops to help immigrants make plans in the event family members are detained or deported. My question to the council would be, does Solvang currently have general orders in place to prevent police or other city employees from assisting the U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement in enforcing federal immigration law? And if not, will the council look into developing a plan? And again, I use the word immigration law loosely. What's going on now is based on executive orders. They have not been subject to court review. And
Thank you, Doctor.
I apologize for going over. Thank you for allowing me to
You bet.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other slips or anybody from Zoom that wants to speak? Seeing none, we'll move on to the next item. City Manager's Report.
Good evening. I have several things to report on. First of all, just today, the state has provided updated fire hazard severity mapping. We have it on our website, I believe, and it will be posted on Facebook if it hasn't already. So you can look at it and see if your home or your neighborhood is included in the new, what they consider high fire zone. Much of the city is not rated. It's only the areas around the perimeter adjacent to county land that really is an area of concern at this point. Wanted to share that the city is nominated for 3 different categories on the USA Today 10 Best Readers' Choice Awards. We have a Best Main Street. We have the Best Small Town and the Best in the West, Best Small Town in the West, and Best Small Town Food Scene. So you can vote about every 9 hours. So vote early and vote often.
Okay.
Is that website up? Is that link on our website?
Right. We have a notice from Waste Management that our next community cleanup day will be on May 17th. As I pointed out before, it's it's the second month of every quarter. It's the third Saturday. So in this case, we just had it last month, and we'll do it again in May, and then in August, and in November. Speaking of the February cleanup, City of Solvang had the highest amount of disposal ever, almost 6 tons. So congratulations to the community. And again, that's another good way to get rid of green waste and other large bulky items that you have to be a resident of Solvang to participate. But that's down here in parking lot 4, down the street. Will be a community discussion on homelessness here in City Hall chambers on Wednesday evening. And Supervisor Hartman and other county staff will be here to talk about that. So that's at 5:30 on the 12th. Tomorrow evening, or tomorrow afternoon at 3 o'clock is the second of our grant meetings that are a prerequisite for us to be able to accept a grant request. And then on March 13th, when is the, that's on the 14th, right? Your meeting, 13th? Oh, okay, I'm looking at too many things. So March 12th, Wednesday, is a homelessness discussion. March 11th, tomorrow, is the grant writing discussion at 3 p.m. And then March 13th at 6 p.m. is the workshop with the DRC and the Planning Commission to talk about the things related to the zoning update that was requested by the council a few meetings ago. Measure U Committee will meet on Tuesday, March 25th at 3 p.m. And there is also another fire awareness mitigation meeting. Currently it's slated for Veterans Hall, but there was a request to move it to City Hall so that we could have video coverage. So that location may change, but it is Monday the 31st at 5:30. And that's all I have for now.
Thank you. Any questions of the manager? Wow, getting off easy. Do you have a question? You turn on your mic? Okay. Then we'll go to item 5. Madam Clerk, would you read that for us, please?
Item 5 is for council members to report out on Government Code Section 53232.3D, aka the AB 1234 Act, and Government Code Section 84308, also known as SB 1439, report out ex parte communications and council member comments requests.
Okay, thank you. You want to start?
Just one thing. I was able to participate in a wonderful event this past Saturday. It was the Women Winemakers and Culinarians celebration. It's an organization that came together about 6 years ago. And it is now a 501c3, and we're raising money for some nonprofits and some sort of women-focused organizations. So we did a grand tasting at 27 Vines on Saturday. So there were about 30 winemakers that were there. Santa Barbara County does have the most female winemakers in all of California, in I think all of the United States. And there was like 22 food vendors. I was one of them. I ran out of 300 sliders in 90 minutes, so I guess they were a success. And it's a fundraiser, so most of us donate 100% of our time, our food, everything and wine to the organization. And this year, the beneficiaries were the Nature Track Foundation, which provides complimentary freedom tracks. So they're allowing those who use wheelchairs to get off the beaten path and experience nature trails, the beach, and other like sort of hard terrain to deal with. And Moe's to Go is a local catering company whose mission is to build an inclusive and equitable workforce, including those with physical and developmental disabilities. So it was really an honor to be at that event and see how many people came out and supported it. So we had about 250 guests there, so
Wow.
it was great. And that's about it.
Okay.
I would like to report I attended the Water Education for Latino Leaders 2025 conference that was held in Garden Grove, California. Great place to stay if you're visiting Disneyland. It's not too far, lots of transportation. But I did not go to Disneyland. I spent some time speaking with fellow leaders about improving representations of minority groups and water legislative bodies. We talked about finding common ground among local agencies and groups to talk about water and how to take decisions so that they benefit our communities. Water should not be a partisan issue. We all need it. It's good to drink it. It's good to bathe in it. And we talked also as well about the fires that affected LA, lessons that we learned. It was heartbreaking to hear about people that had to flee in the middle of the night with nothing but a go-to bag and their dog, affectionately named Cantinflas, and coming back to find nothing after days of nothing but darkness. So we all need to look at becoming more resilient. And they also offer several seminars that anybody can attend that educate leaders and staff about water issues, what questions to ask. They invited you to tour the facility. I was given the invaluable opportunity of drinking water that had been sewage water 24 hours prior. I'm still alive, so those systems work if you invest in them, and that's all I have to report.
Thank you. But
I have a few things. I wanted to just share that over the last couple weeks, I attended our DRC meeting. It was the first meeting. I was just there as a listener to hear our first newly formed DRC and get caught up. I attended the JPA meeting, which was across the entire 3 GSAs in the Valley Basin. So the Western Management, Central Management, Eastern Management agencies all collect once a quarter. So I attended that meeting last week in Buellton. One of the things that was interesting outcome from that meeting is we have received the biannual reading and assessment of our a sampling of our wells across the basin to tell us what is the health and sustainability of our water table. And that report is now published on the JPA and all the mutual EMA websites or the GSA websites. So you can take a look at that if you're curious what these last 2 years of good solid rain have produced for us and if we're seeing the water sustainability come up, and actually it has. There's some interesting data points there that on the whole we have seen a dramatic recovery there are a couple of spots where there's bedrock underlying some of the, or there are wells that are up high in altitude that don't get the, the full rejuvenation or recharge effect. So you get some interesting scientific looking data charts, but you'll see on the whole, we look pretty darn good, and glad to see more rain coming this week. I did not attend our my EMA meeting, but I was elected co-chair. I'll let Mark tell everyone what happened there, how that happened. But I do want to say just one last thing is to promote the wildfire preparedness workshop that's coming up on March 31st. Is as we get more rain, it's so healthy for us all the way around, but it does promote growth. And excessive growth over the last 3 years means we've got to get on top of fire abatement and preparedness in general so that we remain safe as a community. So please come out and get some information in that session.
Thank you. Mr. Afonte.
Thank you, Dave. So I did attend the Groundwater Sustainability Agency for the Eastern Management Area, as Liz had suggested, as her alternate, and accepted her position for her. Stuck it all on her. She has to do it. I just left. We had a good presentation on what was going on in the Eastern Management Area of the county's GSA. I also did attend the meeting in Buellton on the joint meeting between the three different areas of the Groundwater Sustainability Agency for the county, and listened to that until I couldn't stand it anymore. Okay, that's enough. That's it. That's what I did.
Actually, one thing there is just it's because the grants was a theme for first part of this meeting. We did get an update in that meeting, and the grant readouts of how we're planning to spend that money and what all the agencies are planning to do is also published on the website. So another good report to see how the work that's going to be performed over the next year.
Yeah, and in the EMA, we've got a budget issue. We're going to have the city might have to come up with some more money in order to support what's going on. Although the intention is that we would get repaid once we get the full funding out of the state, or the county anyway. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, if I might just piggyback on that, we also talk grant funding, and at this point, nobody knows what it's going to look like, but there are Prop 4 funds that are going to be available for various projects. So, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let our grant writer know that. So, good. Pay attention because I'm going to name names. First of all, thank you to the community for their cleanup, if you will, for the last cleanup. Our manager mentioned it. That was 5.7 tons of debris that was collected in the one afternoon. I want to thank Jonathan Flynn. He did some extra effort in checking water flows and levels from the February rains, and did that on his own, and it's appreciated checking those things for us. I need and I'm going to ask the council a little bit here. Let's get a little further away from the acronyms because we know them, but our audience may not. So the APCD, which is the Air Pollution Control District. I'm looking for a volunteer advisor to that committee to replace our wonderful Dennis Beebe, who was representing the city and has now been poached by the county. They pulled rank on me. So I need another volunteer for that if anybody's interested. Going on to naming names, I want to thank Anna Marie for her vetting and verifying some information that saved us a potential embarrassment, and checking records and so forth. That's much appreciated. And jumping through some hoops to get proclamations and things done on very short notice. So that's much appreciated. Wendy, our financial person, congratulations for joining the San Ynez Valley Aquatics Steering Committee. Well done on that. And our own Louise Smith for her recent interview with Star, the Valley Star. What a wonderful interview, and please read it. Know how heartfelt this woman is as far as her endeavors and love for Solvang. I'd like to also congratulate Raphael, our planning department guy, for some very positive feedback from a builder that I received over the weekend. And let me see. Also, okay, got that. And I think that concludes my list. I've been to some meetings, but that's a lot more boring than just acknowledging these great people. So that's all I had. Thank you. All right. We will go to our consent calendar, item 6. Would you read that, please?
Consent is for routine administrative city matters and is approved with one motion. These items are discussed only on request of council members. Members of the public were afforded an opportunity to speak during the public communications portion of this agenda.
Thank you. Any concerns about the consent calendar? If none, I'd accept a motion to approve it.
I'll move that we accept the consent agenda as presented.
Any second?
I'll second.
It's been properly moved and seconded for item 6A, or 6 approval. Roll call, please.
Councilmember Infante.
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Claudia Rona.
Yes.
Councilmember Smith.
Yes.
Councilmember Elizabeth Arona.
Yes.
Mayor Brown.
Yes.
Motion passes 5-0.
Thank you. We'll move on to item 7. We have no public hearings, so we'll go straight to number 8. And if you'd read that for us, please.
Discussion possible action to approve the agreement with Brightview Landscape Services, Inc. for landscape services for the Solvang Skit Mesa LLMD in the amount of $274,824,000 plus a 10% contingency of $27,500 for a total amount not to exceed $302,324 for the term April 1, 2025 through December 31, 2027, and authorize the mayor to execute on behalf of the city.
Thank you. Staff report, please.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor and Council. So Brightview does the landscaping services over in Skit Mesa. The contract actually expired the end of December, and because of timing concerns, we had council extend it to the end of March. So we put out an RFP, and 4 landscaping services responded. A committee of 3 staff reviewed the RP, the proposals, and concluded that Brightview provided the best option for the city. Although there have been some complaints by a member of the community, overall the service has been great. Costs have gone up a little bit, but it's within the budgeted allowance for LLMD. It is a separate fund. These costs are not, do not affect the general fund at all. And staff requests council approve the contract. And I'm able to answer any questions.
Okay. I myself had a couple of questions. Brighton, do they have I see that they put out surveys twice a year, and they have group communications. Is that a survey of, first of all, do we have a person from Brightview here?
No, we do not.
Okay. My question is, are those surveys of the residents, or are they survey of our staff?
Staff.
Staff surveys. So they're not surveying
Not to my
the
knowledge,
people
no.
they serve, basically?
No, that's
Okay.
correct.
And then the group distribution of emails and the reports, text, do they text or email residents on days like, let's not water today, or let's, any communications in a mass way?
And they have the ability for them to report, the local supervisor has his information available to all the residents.
Okay,
And then they can always contact the city as well.
okay. But if we had an issue up there, rodents. or
Broken
whatever-
sprinkler or something like that, yeah.
All right. Thank you. Any other questions for?
Go ahead. Mine's very simple. Go ahead.
I was looking at the list of trees. Now, I didn't check every one of these trees, but there's a couple of them that show not applicable. And one of them's a vacant site, and so I went to Google Maps and looked at the satellite view, and there is an empty site right next to this address. But there are trees on it, so I was wondering why it's not applicable.
The list of trees was provided as part of the proposal for them to, that they're required to maintain. I can't answer that specific question because I'm not aware of the reason. But if it's on the list, they're required to maintain it. Perhaps it was not LLMD responsibility. It might be the private landowner.
On a vacant lot, really?
Well, the lot's owned by somebody.
Yeah, it has to, well, but then if that's an HOA requirement, they got to pay for it.
If it's a part of the community, yes, it would be maintained, and that might be why it's NA. But again, I can't answer that because I didn't put that list together.
It's minor. There was only 2 of them out of a list of hundreds.
Yeah.
So, but it was just a curiosity. Thank you.
Your report says this is no impact to general fund.
Correct.
So it's within budget. It's within what we had budgeted for this obligation for the LLMD.
Yes.
We're looking at the contract because it's a contract renewal, or it's a new contract for a new term. Is that right?
It's a 3-year contract with 2 possible 1-year extensions, which is the way they set it up before.
Okay. I have no other questions.
Quick question for you with regards to the fees that are paid. It's a tax that's put on the property, and they're paid to the county, and then they send it back to the city. Is that?
That's correct.
My understanding? And is that exclusively for the landscaping, or? does that
Landscape
include
and lighting,
roads?
yes.
Does it include roads?
No.
Does it include a management fee to the city for their?
The city collects $12,000 a year, I believe, for managing the contract.
And that's from when it started, correct?
Yes, each year.
And is our fee agreements that is forthcoming, does that have any impact on that?
The engineering services will be before council soon. Basically, what will happen, and Bridget and I have had conversations with Francisco and Associates, which is the firm that does the calculates what the assessment should be based on our known expenses, what our current fund balances are, and anticipated expenses for the following year. If you recall, last year when we were having these discussions, there was a thought that they might be putting in lighting to illuminate the sign over at Skip Mesa in 246. Roger, before he left, was able to do a survey of the community, and obviously not everybody responded. There's 169 lots, but a sufficient number responded, and they chose to not do that. So that project will drop out of the queue for the calculations that the engineer does, and may determine that no increase is necessary this next year. Again, I'm speculating. But basically, it's a plus and minus based on what the current fund balance is, what the estimated costs are, what the long-term other maintenance needs might be. And then they do the math and say it needs to be X dollars per lot. And then we come back to council, have a public hearing about it, and then the council decides whether or not they agree with the engineer.
Right. I just want to make sure it's revenue neutral.
It is revenue neutral overall. There's a goal they have for maintaining a certain balance. Obviously, if a major storm came through and knocked a bunch of trees down, and that wouldn't be included in the contract. but it would be paid for by the district, not by the city.
No, but I understand. I mean, revenue neutral for our
Our general
staff time
fund,
and
yeah, we're
whatnot,
not
so-
impacted at all.
Okay, good. That's all I had. Any other questions? Any public comment on that? Okay. Then and if there's no other discussion, we'll entertain a motion to approve.
I'll make a motion to approve the contract with Brightview.
I'll second that.
It's been properly moved and seconded to approve the Brightview contract, item 8A. Roll call, please.
Councilmember Infante?
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Claudia Rona?
Yes.
Councilmember Smith?
Yes?
Councilmember Elizabeth Arona?
Yes.
Mayor Brown?
Yes,
Motion passes 5-0.
Thank you.
thank you. Now we'll move on to item 8B. Would you read that for us, please?
Discussion and possible direction to staff regarding future infrastructure and land use planning.
Thank you. Mr. Raphael, our staff report, please.
Yes, thank you. So we're bringing you this item that was requested as a part of the council goals. It's actually related to council goals and number 2, number 7, and number 13. Number 2 is analyzing limited uses in the urban growth boundary. 7 was assess opportunities and financing to improve traffic and pedestrian and bicycle circulation. And number 13 is analyze increased water storage or supply with additional and or larger reservoirs, et cetera. So all these are sort of intertied together to the main topic of our future infrastructure and land use planning. So just to give a sort of brief overview of the staff report that was provided to you, the city boundary is approximately 2.4 square miles. It's the area that's represented on the black outline in your screen. Not to make alphabet soup, but there's a thing called an SOI, or sphere of influence. So it's an area which is identified by Santa Barbara County, LAFCO, or Local Area Formation Committee, where future growth could occur, but it's not within the city limits. So in that instance here, you'll see it in the blue outline that's on your screen. So again, the black is our city limits. It's what we consider city of Solvang proper. The blue is the SOI, or sphere of influence. So in 2020, the city adopted what was known as an urban growth boundary. So there was a petition that was started by residents known as SOS, or Save Our Solvang. And this petition was gathered during 2020. It did have enough registered voters that signed off on it to take it to the vote of the residents of the city of Solvang. And so the city council had an opportunity in June 2020 to do sort of 3 things. One, adopt the ordinance as is. 2, gather some more information on the pros and cons of the ordinance, and then come back with that for a vote to either put it on a ballot for the vote of the people or not. Or 3, just send it on to the vote of the people. The council voted 4-1 to adopt the initiative as proposed versus ordering report or on the potential effects. So the urban growth boundary incorporated a lot of our old general plan inside of it, and it also established the existing city limits as a boundary for growth and development. So on the previous screen, I showed you that the black lines and the blue lines. A black line is essentially all of the city of Solvang, and requires a vote by residents to annex land in the city. So if we want to expand beyond that black line that's in your staff report and that was on the screen, that would require a vote of the residents to do that. The city of Bealton just recently did that as a part of their last election. So just to give you an idea of what some of our neighbors are doing. However, there are specific instances where a vote is not required, and the staff report got into it. So this is the urban growth boundary. It's one of the many tools in the toolbox for limiting growth in annexations. Annexations are actually a pretty lengthy process to go under in the state of California, but it's just a representation of one tool and one tool only. The urban growth boundary, as it stands today, affects a lot of our things, and we're going to talk about housing specifically, water supply, and emergency access and ingress and egress. So those are 3 items that we brought up in the staff report. So the city had to rezone 3 sites, or upzone, as many of you know. It was a very long struggle to get those completed. During what we considered our RHNA cycle, or Regional Housing Needs Assessment, which is our current period, is now the 6th cycle. We do anticipate 2 of the 3 sites will develop during that cycle. However, that cycle ends in 2031, so by about 2030, we're going to go through this process all over again. And we don't have the land. However, the state law, the city has some parcels, that we could develop. There was talk about that earlier from residents in terms of Site 72 or some of the open space parcels, et cetera. But those all have nuances. Site 72 has got archaeological issues, and then there are open space parcels that, from a legality standpoint, may be a little bit more difficult to turn into housing. And specifically, the state has a Surplus Land Act that basically gives cities that has this surplus land only X amount of time to work with developers to acquire, develop, and process housing production on those excess lands. So it's a little bit more cumbersome when the city owns the land. So as we sort of look into the future, we are really faced with some dilemmas that unfortunately these are going to be harder conversations to go, especially as we grow nearer and nearer to the end of our cycle, is continue to pursue upzones and rezoning of properties. So an upzone is essentially taking land that was either previously designated commercial or industrial, et cetera, and zone that into higher density residential. Or continue to enact infill policies that include more density and basically increase height limits to accommodate. And unfortunately, those are sort of our two growth constraints that we have, particularly with the urban growth boundary. So in the ordinance itself, it does allow for the city council to annex land without a vote if it can make certain findings. So I did mention there were two of them, that this happens to be one of the items that allows the city council to annex land. However, it states that there's no greater density that is necessary to accommodate the required housing. I don't know what that actually means. The language is ambiguous as it doesn't prescribe whether it's project-specific density or overall site density or density of an area. So you can sort of get where we're going with, which is why typically when these things come in, we like to do an analysis of these things. And so, and as I stated before, annexations, they take a long time, and they're actually very costly endeavors because any sort of housing-related effort to expand the city limit would need a long-range planning document. We've actually done a few of these in our history. The specific plan for the village plan, that's also the specific plan. That's how these typically get done, or a master plan, et cetera. And those sort of just lay out how infrastructure gets paid for, how many phasing of units or land uses, et cetera. All that's a part of a master planning effort. Then that would need to get approved by you, the city council, and then it needs to go to LAFCO for approval, and then it's a long process. It's a very expensive process at that. Our urban growth boundary affects our water security. So again, we could benefit from exploring annexation and any potential new well sites, as we are committed to a reliable, safe, and drinking water supply. The urban growth boundary initiative limits new well sites that are immediately adjacent. But what's immediately adjacent? Is it right next to the boundary? Is it 2 parcels down from the boundary, et cetera? It also lists, takes language from our previous general plan. However, there's no detail on what are public facilities and services. So again, the urban growth boundary allows for 2 sort of call outs that you can do an annexation without a vote of the people. Public services facilities is one of those, but it doesn't really explain it. It actually just punts it back to our old general plan, which no longer exists, and the text no longer exists on top of that. So again, there's no implementation ordinance that exists to interpret what was originally meant with the urban growth boundary. So typically there's a growth management plan or some sort of way that tells us what we're interpreting, what is immediately adjacent. Is it exactly against the boundary? Is it is it less than 500 feet, et cetera? These are things that, limit specifically our ability to secure water, especially if there's a property owner that would like to exchange functioning water wells for potential future development. Those are things that would need to get written in. Those are things that need to be explored, but our current urban growth boundary as it stands today limits that. So the last thing that the UGB doesn't really focus on is alternative routes for emergency. So there's no provision for transportation alternative access routes at all. It talks about public facilities infrastructure, and lanes lists off a whole bunch of stuff. It doesn't even actually talk about schools, interesting enough. And then it talks about housing, but there's nothing about transportation and nothing about alternative routes. So these are the routes that residents can utilize in case of emergencies. And this is a growing concern, particularly with current limited ingress and egress in all directions, and particularly with our wildfires that we recently saw in Los Angeles and others that have gone through in the last couple of years. So it is a great concern with the added amount of traffic and having the ability to have an emergency ingress and egress. So there could potentially be new roads or emergency access roads that could be envisioned on the outer edges. But again, the UGB never, ever envisioned this. So that is another thing that's sort of limited by our urban growth boundary that exists in an ordinance today. So again, we're bringing this to your attention as a part of the goals that were asked of city staff. And we did lay out some options for the city council. This is initially to start a discussion for that. So the city staff had come up with 3 options. The first one is do nothing. We can leave the ordinance as is, 2040, that's what we got. We'll work with the tools that are given to us. That's not a problem. Again, only 400, just over 400 residents signed the petition, but we don't know if the residents would have voted it in. We just don't know. So we're okay with that. The second one is direct staff to study ways to either amend or repeal the ordinance. That's something that, if you direct city staff, we'll be working with the city attorney team, myself, Jose at Utilities to go over how to get that done. So again, this is we would need to study, analyze, and bring options back to before you as the council. The third one is to direct city staff to codify an urban growth management plan. When I first started doing a little deep dive into this, that was the actual first thing I looked for is where is it in the charter and where is it in the ordinance, and neither two existed. The light bulb kind of went in, well, we can actually codify a growth management plan that can interpret the original urban growth boundary for housing and infrastructure allowances. So we're able to then, again, bring that back in a codified form so that it lays out what is that process in terms of if the city council were to make the findings, what do those findings look like, and lay it out through a municipal code update. And then that way it gives you a little bit more power to make those interpretations. So with that, I'll open up to city council for questions.
Any questions? Where do you start? I think probably that one of the things that why this is brought up, one, I very much like the idea of water independence. We don't have that. This could create that. The other thing I think is that we can, as it is now, our 2.5 acre city is.
Mile.
I'm sorry?
Mile, acres, tiny.
Tiny, well,
Mile.
it's what I say, acres, 2.5 miles, yeah. Yeah, it's dinky. But the mandates that are put on us by the state for growth and for housing will affect that 2.5 acre or 2.5 mile site, and it makes a big impact on our little village. If we could have a little wiggle room, we may not have some of these other housing project issues that are before us today as well. And so I would like to see if there's some way that we can have the previous urban growth boundary removed, and then have city council or direct staff to what would that plan be and look like for available.
Well, before we do that, we need to figure out what it is that we can and cannot do based on that ordinance. I wondered if we have more background about what was the intent on it. Is it to not allow for, like, I don't know, big box stores to have the space to open in Solvang? Is it to is it to not have more cost on managing more land? Do we have any background on what it was meant to do originally?
I think I can add some history, if I may. About 6 years ago, under Jim Richardson's council, they hired a consultant to do a survey of the surrounding areas and give us what they thought it should be in the way of growth. it bothered so many residents that what happened here, they actually stopped the contract in the middle of it. Because these guys didn't finish it, but they were talking about putting in trailer parks over here and stuff over there, and it just wasn't stuff that fit the city. And that was what was the basis of what these 500 people or whatever it was that put that together and came into the council a year later under, what's his name? So that was the history behind it that I recall. Let me put it that way.
I want to make a comment here, if I may. The question of what can we do as a council, and Raphael, you made another comment, which was you didn't understand or had to interpret what is one of the conditions, if you will, in the language of the original urban boundary definition, that we have a provision if state or federal law requires the city to accommodate the housing that will be permitted by the amendment, and that the amendment permits no, and that doesn't say that, but it would, I'm interpreting that, and that the amendment would permit no greater density than necessary to accommodate required housing. So, not being a lawyer, usually lawyer language is very exact, but we have to interpret what is the intent. And the intent, I think, says we can amend the urban boundary definition if we're meant to do it to accommodate housing at densities that we've already established in our general or our housing element plan. I think that's what it says, because I read that like 4 or 5 times over the weekend. Sort of like, what can we do here? And that looks pretty straightforward to me. It says there's a condition if the law is driving us to develop more housing, and we have established our density rules, which we spend a lot of time doing with a lot of input from the public last year, I think we have the elbow room to at least assess this in a way that advises the council and staff, what can we do to consider annexing developable space that conveniently is at the edge of the city boundary, which also conveniently lets us really plan for where is the considerate places for us to develop and grow the city in all the right ways with more thought, without taking variables off the table. So much anxiety for us last year when we couldn't address traffic, we couldn't address parking, we couldn't address the pressure on water and wastewater. We were just pressured to develop affordable housing, and no, I should probably now say on record, I don't think anybody was really comfortable with that. So here's an opportunity for us to plan it. Is that fair? I mean, I guess I'm asking a question. Is that because also you've presented like what we can get with this consideration is the ability to address sustainable water supply, the convenience of addressing, pressure on traffic on Mission, and alternate routes. You've positioned it as, how did you say it? Alternate exits, as if they're safe routes, but we just need a way out sometimes. I mean, that's not just straight down Mission. So I guess I would ask, to be really deliberate, staff coming to council, do you recommend we do this because it gives us a bit more control with public input? That's always been great in Solvang, but a little more ability to get ahead of what the state's going to demand from us.
So I'm going to answer two questions at the same time because I recognize Claudia's question in terms of why did we do this. And Mark, thank you for the history. That actually connects the dots in my head while you were talking. So the point of this was to establish a green belt essentially around the city, establish the boundaries and preserve open space and agriculture. I'm 100% for that. No, 100%, no doubt. But that's the intent of what it was written for, was so that Solvang can remain a small community, preserve the open space that surrounds us, preserve the hillsides and the ag, et cetera. That is the primary reason why municipalities and communities like ours do urban growth boundaries. Now, to answer your question, would this allow, if we were to eliminate or go down the route of eliminating the urban growth boundary, then that provides the city the tool that it needs to actually properly plan and execute future growth. A great example is this LMD that you just had, the item before. Typically, I would advise, and I typically had my consultant hat, would advise municipalities never do that because it's more staff time and money. Just do an HOA or Melrose or some other thing that is not consuming staff's time to manage. And that, again, through a proper planning document, outlays how we are going to look and grow over the next 10, 15 years from a specific plan, master plan process that provides us the proper ability and avenue. And so when we're looking at the next RENA cycle, the state's not going to say, oh, we can't just say, well, we're going to take that land that's there, that's next to us, but we still need to go through the process of doing a master plan, and then we need to annex it, and then we need to get the vote from LAFCO to annex that, and then, oh, by the way, we need to do a tax sharing agreement with the county to figure this all out. That takes time, and we're talking years, not 9 months, not 10 months, not a year for a rezone. Those are years, and usually it starts with a planning document. So if the answer is, does it give us more control? Yes, it does. In either option of either repealing it completely or in the option of establishing an urban growth, an ordinance that sort of interprets what we're actually looking for in terms of the densities of housing. Because again, it's one thing to annex a singular piece of property and call it 20 units to the acre. That's great. You're still missing a whole bunch of key components, which is how much it's going to cost, where the road's going to come from, where's the water going to come from. But if we say instead, we're going to interpret this as this will require a master plan or specific plan that outlays phasing, and that infrastructure is not borne by the city. Landscaping is not borne by the city. Road maintenance is not done by the city. And these are things that we properly outlay. Then that gives us the ability to plan in the future and have more tools in our tool chest that I think were never brought up as a part of this initial UGP initiative.
I do have just one question because you made me think of it. So I'm going to ask the question and then go on record. The sphere of influence versus our black dotted line of the actual city border. Did I hear you correctly say that we can annex anything in the sphere of influence? Is it anything on the perimeter? What are the limitations, or are there any for what we could consider annexing?
So currently the sphere of influence is the area recognized by Santa Barbara County LAFCO as our area of influence. So, a case in point, our wastewater treatment plant's actually in our sphere, but not in our city limit. It's odd, but that's so. If the county were to provide an application on the adjacent piece of property that's adjacent to our sphere, we will be notified and we'll be able to make comments. And as an agency that's in the sphere, it's typically easier to annex properties that are within our sphere than it is to not annex properties that are outside the sphere. So it's really the point of the sphere of influence is to say, okay, cities, we will imagine this will be your growth pattern over the next 20, 30 years if you decide to push out. So, I mean, that's generally where LAFCO, at least for the time being, expects us to grow. But it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to align with where we actually want to grow.
Okay, fair enough. So I personally would really welcome an opportunity for our council to demonstrate to the city of Solvang that we can plan effectively for city growth. So I would welcome it, and if there is an opportunity that's in front of us somehow, somewhere, I would really appreciate if the staff brought it forward.
Murphy?
So I also wanted to point out, unfortunately, this was not considered when the general plan was just rewritten. The urban growth boundary has been something of a sacred cow in the sense of an unwillingness from staff, prior staff, and maybe the whole committee to even consider it. So, this kind of started coming to light as the controversial project that's in town right now, and will be before council probably in a year or so to finalize, is exactly why we need to consider the urban growth boundary issue now. Because the only way to meet the upcoming RENA numbers, we don't have the developable land, and that's 3 times fast. And so that means we go up, we increase density, we convert single-family residential into multifamily, and that's not Solvang. So the idea of us to be able to look at areas outside of the current city limit, outside this current sphere of influence, other areas that would give us water security, that would give us opportunity for emergency egress. But to go back to Council Arona's comment earlier about the kind of parsing that language, I think an argument could be made too. Only take what you need right now. And so you'll end up doing a bunch of bite-sized pieces with no master planning, without any significant forethought. And okay, we need to add, I'm making numbers up for the sake of the conversation, we need to add 250 units. Okay, so now we'll bump out, a couple of acres to be able to build those 250 units. But what about the next cycle and the next cycle? So it's the opportunity to look at what I would say option 3 would be, that was presented, gives the opportunity to make a master plan, to look at where the city is going. Do we need more commercial area, or does it all need to be residential? Do we need more park? That park master plan that's underway now will be, asking those questions. So ultimately, this is the way to get there. But as Raphael pointed out, it's a lengthy process. We have to go through LAFCO, which can be years, especially if some of the property we're looking at annexing is currently prime agricultural land, because they're resistant to that. So it's going to take some time, and we need to think 10, 20 years down the road, not 6 months or a year.
And just to piggyback on that point, you as a city council, and I know that there was a lot of folks, you made a tough decision in November to greenlight a new zoning ordinance, and you passed that. And so you essentially took the low-hanging fruit, the policies that are in that zoning ordinance, basically greenlit adaptive reuse of our buildings that are upper stories, that are currently offices that have been vacant for a while. Those are now beginning to, property owners can now have that option to do residential. You've taken the low-hanging fruit, which is great. We'll hopefully get more units in, and we're doing the right thing. But as Randy mentioned, I can't tell you what the next fruit's going to look like, and I don't know how much more low-hanging fruit we got after the action that you made. And so we got to keep solving. And in order to do that, it's not going to be going 4 or 5 stories. It's just not.
Any other comments? I also wanted to say that if we're to choose our own destiny, we have to have access to otherwise the county will choose it for us. Yep. And so that's the other issue, or the state. So it's up to us, and I think there's a great discussion. I want to put it out to public comment now, if there's any public comment that anybody has on Zoom or otherwise. Mr. Beebe?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, council members. Thank you for your service to the community. I just didn't quite understand some of the options, and there was a discussion about repealing the urban growth boundary, but that's a pretty big change, and you can't make a change without a vote, right? I mean, I don't see how that's an option other than letting it expire. So I just like to know, it's great to plan. I encourage it, I endorse it, but I guess I'd like maybe some discussion as when does the public, these activists that voted 400 or 500 people, that's a big voting block. So I just like to know where the public is involved in doing the right thing and planning for the future. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you. Any others on Zoom or? Okay. We'll close public comment. I do know that with regards to Mr. Beebe's comments, that we can modify the urban growth boundaries, but I don't think we can repeal it. I don't know what legal would say to something like that, or what options we have. Go ahead.
I've had conversation with other attorneys with the firm, and yes, to repeal it, it does require a vote. Again, unfortunately, the language that adopted it and is currently there is ambiguous. So what does exactly these things mean? What does, and that's ultimately why we're asking for direction, because, we don't know either. And we can make some assumptions, but you know what happens when you assume anything. So we have to be careful with that. So the idea would be to get, if we get the direction from council to investigate this matter further, it will be exactly that. And we will come back occasionally to have conversations and decision points, if you will, and ask for further direction. To answer Mr. Beebe's question, the community will be involved. It's not going to be a decision by council, certainly definitely not by staff. It'll all be done in open session. It will be conversations, and with that, and there'll be opportunity for people that are pro or con the issue to have their input. And ultimately, to go even further, it will be vetted thoroughly by LAFCO. So, again, as far as any annexation or other expansion of city territory would be also the next step for the community to have a voice.
Yeah. If I may,
Comments? Yeah.
there's three parts to this. Part of it is the housing. Part of it is the emergency access. And with the fire information that we've had and the thinking what we've done about how to get the heck out of town if you need to, in some parts of this, we need another route out, probably to the west. And so that's necessary. And obviously water. So it's definitely, in my mind, not an option to ignore it. It needs to be considered either how to modify it or get rid of it, in my opinion.
Thank you. Any other comments?
I think we better take a look at what we're gonna do with that sphere of influence before the county decides for us.
And I just want to say ditto, ditto, ditto. So I think we definitely have to take a look at this, and we need to have the staff take a look and spend the time and energy to figure out what our options are. And we have so many concerns, so ditto.
I think we,
I just think I don't know that repeal is necessary because it still has some protections that maybe philosophically the city of Solvang it likes. But it gives you conditions under which we can modify or annex. And those conditions, I think, are what needs to be explored. So if we're really specific on, go tell us exactly, help us interpret the language. What are the conditions that we need to meet? How do we notice or involve the public so we are inviting them into the process? And then maybe a little more detail on, like, is this a 2-year process or is it, I know LAFCO probably unpredictable, but show us what that road ahead might look like if we pursue this.
So
or the options.
I think at this point, I'd like to make a motion that we,
We don't need a motion, we're just giving direction to staff.
yeah, okay, so we accept option 2, which is to direct staff to study ways to amend and repeal or repeal the ordinance. I think we need to say that's an option that we want to vote on. Don't we need to make a motion for that? Or just say it and everybody agrees?
I think we're all in agreement of that, but or from the discussion, I guess my question to staff is, do you feel that now from this discussion, you've got some direction that you were looking for?
Yeah, so if you're looking to direct staff to basically study the issue and see what options we can bring back to amend it, and then if the amendments don't necessarily work, then we may have to go to repeal. Is that?
That's a fair statement, but then I think, can you take it a step further? What, to the extent we can appeal it or make modifications, is there a particular area that we should focus on? North, south, east, west?
I don't think we need
Don't need that
I don't think
this
we need a
time?
direction at this
okay.
point, because again, there's no application on the table. This is an informational item. I think just having the direction to take a look at this and study it and see ways to amend it, interpret,
Okay.
and or repeal is sufficient.
Is it adequate, or do you still want to go?
That's what
Okay.
yes.
Well, I think we're in agreement then. Mr. Castillo, thank you. Unless there's anything else, that concludes our endeavors for tonight.
I do want to add one thing. A lot of people know that to stay informed about what the city is doing, they go to our agendas, they can see what the topics are. But sometimes when hot topics come up and people hear about it on the newspaper or through social media, they go, oh, well, they should have told everybody, and it just gives the impression that we're not being transparent. So I just wonder if, in addition to, posting everything that we post online, maybe we can have a newsletter every so often that is more easily digestible. I'll say the automatic notifications that we get from the website are not exactly reader-friendly. So maybe we can think about some sort of extra communication that people can refer to. Yeah, maybe sometimes it can be translated into Spanish if it's something that's particularly pressing, just putting that out there.
We've discussed that internally as staff, so it is on our radar. I hesitate to say absolutely yes unless it's definitely council direction, only because, again, we all have a fair amount of work we're doing.
Yeah.
We do press releases and things about important matters. So if we don't do a newsletter, as you suggest, then maybe we could be more diligent about some of the things that we think might be controversial so that they're aware. I know from my experience in other jurisdictions that I call prior lives, no matter what, you could do skywriting. You could go literally door to door and tell people what's going on. And until it hits their pocketbook or otherwise causes them an inconvenience, they're going to say, I didn't know.
Right.
So, the old lead a horse to water issue.
And we are currently putting notifications into the water bills for different things.
We've done that as well, but a lot of people pay their bill online.
They don't read it. Gotcha.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate everybody's comments, and we are adjourned at 8:24. Thank you.